Fusion, the international science radio show.
Hi, my name is Dr Munro Neville. I am the Medical Director for Momentum Clinical Research in Australia and the Principal Investigator for our Sydney St Leonard's unit.
Can I ask you to explain for people who've only just heard about it, what is the RSV?
So RSV, I mean, it's been around for a long time. And in fact, before COVID, when if you had a nasal swab taken, or respiratory panels, what it's called, it's one of the standard viruses in the panel. So flu, RSV, metapneumovirus, and a whole lot of others. Flu and RSV have always notifiable diseases, as is COVID. So I guess it's sort of one of the big three. I still think of COVID, flu, RSV as the big three respiratory viruses in Australia and in the world.
And it's RSV. What does it stand for?
It's respiratory syncytial virus. So it's a bit of an old name because it's based on microscopic appearance. So the cells that are affected sort of coalesce. Syncytial is Greek for clumping. So yeah, clump. So basically it causes some cells to aggregate together under the microscope. But it's just another one of the respiratory viruses. It's another typical respiratory viruses spread by droplets. Typically seen in winter. We've had a bit of a difference post-COVID because with all the border closures, I mean, in some ways it was quite good because there really wasn't any respiratory viruses, no COVID, no RSV, and no flu for 2 years. The downside was as soon as the borders opened, obviously we got lots of COVID in, but we also got lots of RSV. So it came back big time in December when all the borders were open, big spike. But it's normally like flu, it's normally a seasonal winter virus, and it shows that seasonal pattern, which COVID yet doesn't do. COVID is still in pandemic phase, so it doesn't show that winter seasonality. It's a sort of perennial problem.
And people get worse case, or they're more likely to get a worse case if they're much younger or much older than most adults?
Yeah, I mean, in contrast to some other viruses, yes, they're very young, so sort of the under 12 months. I mean, one of the things about young children is they are going to get it because it's highly infectious. So most children under the age of 2 have had it. So a relatively small proportion are really quite sick, but obviously they can get really sick. Being young babies, it's really important to make sure they recover. So it does affect the under 2s badly. So it's always been seen as sort of a children or a pediatric type virus, but in fact, older people, and in Australia, the vaccine's 16 above. So I don't know, it doesn't seem very old, but 16 above are eligible for the new vaccine, but very much 75 and above, or 60, 65 and above with comorbidities are the highest risk. And it's a bit like flu, they are the ones who are at highest risk. But the general population, so the younger population, can also, I mean, you hear so many stories about people who've had RSV and they've been in bed for a week. So it can be quite nasty, even for younger people. It's particularly severe for the babies, and then for older people, particularly over 75, over 60s, and particularly if they've got complications like asthma or chronic bronchitis.
And I hadn't heard much about RSV until the vaccine was introduced last year.
Well, again, about 10 years ago, there was a major advance in virology. So RSV has something called a fusion protein, an F protein, which is very, very similar in concept to the spike protein for COVID. It's the bit that fuses to the human cells. And it's unusual in that it stays in what's called a pre-fusion form for a very short period of time. And then as soon as it fuses with the cell, it reconfigures, different format. So it wasn't until 2014, 2015, when an eminent virologist identified the pre-fusion complex so that a vaccine was able to be produced. So again, unlike COVID, which had, billions of dollars thrown at it and all prioritization, it's followed the normal sort of development path. So yes, it has been around. I guess it hasn't really ever reached people's attention. Actually, it's not quite true. It's not been top of mind for people until their kid gets really sick, or until an older person gets really sick, and then it's like, oh my God, what is this RSV? So when we did, and I know we'll talk about studies, when we did do the original or pivotal study for the older person's vaccine, the number of people who came in saying, oh my God, I had this 3 years ago, is shocking. So it is around. And I think one of the things is, since COVID, people are more comfortable and perhaps even want to have a respiratory PCR test done. And so I think people are actually beginning to see it more because, like I said, it's one of the standard panel you get, and it's not uncommon. In fact, we've had quite a big wave. It sort of came a little bit earlier. It's sort of late spring, early winter. There's quite a big peak.
Well, there you go. So it's been around for a long time.
Yes, there was no treatment for it. I mean, even now, for the children now, there is an immunoglobulin you can get, but really it's just supportive care. So it's just been around, and it's the old soldier on mentality. And I think the soldier on mentality, I'm hoping I don't think it's gone, but I'm hoping people, isolate and put a mask on rather than soldier on and spread it, because people used to just get a common cold, and in most cases it is just a common cold, and you just soldier on and get on with it. And it's only when it's really severe you pick up.
And were you involved in trials of this new vaccine?
So there are 2 new vaccines actually in adults. So I've been involved in both. One is available. One's available in Australia. It's called RSV. So it's currently been approved by the TGA and is commercially available. It's quite hard to get hold of. I'm told. It's not cheap either because it's not yet funded. I was hoping I think it was made available in February or March, and so it didn't get into the most recent budget. I'm hoping that next year there will be some funding for it. Again, it'll be in the same sort of population as the flu vax, the older population. As in 65 plus, I think. Yeah, so that one's available. There's another one that has been approved. It's just not yet available. So another one's coming fairly soon. And I imagine they're looking at next year's vaccination season, sort of early next year, March, perhaps next year.
And you were saying it's only available for over 60s. Is that because of any sort of risk with the vaccine or more?
No, the study itself, so when you do clinical trials, there's sort of an incremental process to it. So you started in the highest risk people. So the highest risk people were, over 60s. They chose over 60. It's interesting, like the flu vaccine's over 65, but the cutoff age is sort of coming down. We've done studies now 50 plus. This one was 60 plus. And that's because they are at greatest risk within the adult population of suffering complications from the infection. So you start with there, and then you go down. So we've got a study ongoing at the moment. You're looking at younger people, so 18 to 49, who have got risk factors for complications such as diabetes, chronic obstructive disease, asthma, bronchitis, and so on. So yeah, you tend to start at the highest risk and then move down. As it's been shown to be safe, effective, you can then move into other populations where it's not quite as bad, but it can be quite nasty.
So what's the process to put this sort of a vaccine through a clinical trial for safety and efficacy?
So typically there's preclinical work, and then it moves into clinical work. So in the clinical work in humans, there's phase 1, 2, and 3. So we were involved. I do phase 2 and 3. So we've done phase 2 of some studies. The one that has recently finished, as in recently just days ago, was a 3-year long-term safety and efficacy study looking at the prevention or avoidance of acute respiratory infections due to RSV. And that's the one that's called a registration study. So it's the one that the pharmaceutical companies submit to the FDA and to the TGA and the other major regulatory bodies to get approval. So in fact, the results were, really good. after 1 year. So they submitted based on the 1 year data, and now they've just closed for the 3 year data. So they did 5 seasons in all, so 3 seasons in the north and 2 seasons in the southern hemisphere. And they're now looking at, what's the likelihood, or is a booster a benefit, or is a one-off vaccine all that's required?
Is it hard to get volunteers for the clinical trials?
So we no, actually, the answer is no. There's a lot of people. So why do people do clinical trials? So we do two. There's 2 types of trials we do. One is in a population who suffers from a condition. So it could be diabetes, hypertension. I mean, that's those kind of things. So people might not be well controlled, and so they're looking, what a new advance comes out, and can that lead to control? So I guess there is, for those people, there is some kind of benefit, but most of them still do it for the altruism, for the science, because I mean, even in those studies, I mean, particularly there's usually some kind of comparison which could be a placebo. So you've got a chance of not getting it, the new intervention. So most people do it because, from our experience, and I think it does vary by location, but in our experience, and I think this is part of the culture we like to follow, it's people who become involved because they like to advance medicine. So that's with sort of population that have a condition, and then the healthy volunteers, which is typically the vaccine group. So we were looking at people who were older, who might have had pre-existing conditions, but we were vaccinating them as healthy individuals, as in not acutely unwell, but basically just to stop infection in that at-risk population. And that population definitely is all about is helping to develop the science and the understanding of the vaccine. So I mean, it depends on I guess the prevalence of the condition and how well known it is. So I think RSV, when we first started off, wasn't very well known, and so people were, what is that? So we had a lot of conversations with people about what it was. Whereas when you do a COVID study, everyone knows what COVID is, and everyone wants to be involved. But a lot of people want to be involved in the next variant. How much better is the next variant? So it does depend on how much disease awareness or illness or vaccine awareness there is for that particular population. But we've definitely seen in the last year a big increase in awareness of RSV, and I think that might be because there's a bit in the media, but there's also, I think, more people are having swabs done and go, oh, it's RSV.
How long does it take? So if you're a volunteer in one of these clinical trials, how long a period of time would you be participating?
So again, it does depend on the clinical trial design. So the pivotal one, the one in the 60 plus, was actually a 3-year study, looking at, it actually was 2 Southern Hemisphere seasons and 3 Northern Hemisphere seasons. So that took 3 years. And that's because when you have a brand new vaccine, you have to show what's efficacy. So you have to show that compared to placebo, it's placebo controlled, because that's what the FDA needs to make sure it's really well controlled. Compared to placebo, the number of infections are statistically reduced. So there's a significant reduction in the number of infections, because that's the primary endpoint of interest. But then it's possible then to say, okay, if you get to a certain antibody level in your blood, you are the likelihood of having infection is reduced. And so subsequent studies, like the one we're currently doing, only compares antibody levels. So in fact, that's the primary endpoint of those is 1 month, and then is it maintained at 6? So it's a 6-month study. So it depends on the study design and what the objective of that particular study is. And again, that tends to be driven by the FDA telling the company, this is what you need to show us.
Those sort of randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, they're the gold standard of medicine, medical research, aren't they?
Yes, and certainly all the studies we're involved in are randomized. The vaccine studies we tend to do are what's called observer blinded. So in fact, one or two, we have a pharmacist and one of the study nurses are what's called unblinded, because with vaccines, someone has to reconstitute. Someone has to take it out of the vial and reconstitute it for injection. And so those people know which vial you've got. So the only interaction they have with the participants is they reconstitute, they inject, they leave. And so the blind is maintained. The patient doesn't know. The investigators and the other study coordinators don't know. So the blind is important to make sure there's no, inherent bias. Because if I knew someone was having it, or if someone knew they were having the active as opposed to placebo, they might, either feel very positive, or they might feel that they're having side effects related to the vaccine administration. So you have to keep it blind.
You do. And what sort of technology is involved in this new vaccine?
The RSV vaccine?
Sorry, yes, the RSV vaccine. So how does it work?
Again, it's a vaccine specifically against the F, or the fusion protein, in RSV. So it produces antibodies specific to the pre-fusion. So it's to the structure of that protein prior to binding to humans. So basically, you have lots of antibodies, and as soon as they encounter the antigen or the virus, they just combine, and it stops it fusing with your cells, and it's just got rid of. So it basically stops the infection. And so with that, I said before, that pivotal study, the 1 year data of the 3 year follow-up showed a 94% prevention of severe disease, hospitalization, or really incapacitated, which was amazing. I mean, and sort of in the high 70s for all disease. So it's very similar to those results we saw for the COVID vaccines when they first came out. But what's different is RSV has been around for years, and everyone's been exposed to it. Whereas COVID, we're all naive to it. So it was a very, very good response.
Would make quite a difference. So it's going to be for the over 60s for now, but after the next lots of clinical trials, it could go to younger people, and then
I'd say younger people are at risk of severe complications. So again, it's similar to flu. So the people you look at are people with asthma, diabetes, heart failure, or other cardiac conditions, some neurological conditions. People who they're not at greater risk of catching it, but they're just greater risk of getting sicker if they do catch RSV. That's a couple of years off. I mean, I think the study itself will take us 6 months, and then normally 6 to 12 months is the data collection and submission, and then it all depends on how quickly the FDA and obviously the TGA here approve it.
Are there any potential treatments for severe RSV?
No, at the moment it's entirely supportive. For older adults, it's supportive. So if you do go into hospital, it's all about hydration, managing symptoms, and just making you comfortable and at your best. There's no treatment as such.
Amazing. Is there anything I haven't asked you'd like to raise?
So treatments are coming. So there are some treatments in the is it phase 2 or phase 3? We're actually doing it next year. So there are treatments coming. Again, as you're saying, it's interesting because people didn't know much about RSV, but as soon as the pre-fusion was identified, suddenly people could actually develop vaccines and could develop treatments, and it takes years normally. So we have a lot of people who we've been involved in COVID studies and RSV studies, and there's a few skeptics, I think, coming back down to our introduction. There's a few skeptics about COVID and the COVID vaccine, and is it safe, and it's just so quick. I think it could always be this quick if there was as much money thrown at it. I mean, one of the things is the ethics committees, certainly in Australia, and I'm sure worldwide, were only interested in COVID. So if you want, basically everything was fast tracked and got through. And but yeah, so this particular vaccine has done the normal several years in development, which I know people can't find frustrating, because when you see the clips on the news, such new treatments coming, and it's going to be 5, 6, 7 years.
It is a really frustrating thing. I mean, I report medical breakthroughs and stories every week. That there's something there, but as you say, it can be 10 years or more.
Yeah, 10 years. Well, that was RSV. When it was identified in 2014 thereabouts, it's taken 10 years to get something actual that works, that's proven. So again, they went through the phase 1, first in human, went through the phase 2, which is dose finding. So in terms of a vaccine, the dose finding is how much of the antigen you need to give to get that immune response. And once you identify, they've got a pretty good idea of what immune response you need from the phase 2 work, and then you prove it in phase 3. So yeah, each one of those is sequential, and they do take time. And I mean, because normally you would evaluate and get the answer before moving on to stage 2, and so it is a sequential development process, which I know it can be frustrating, but it is interesting how when it was fast track with COVID, people were, too quick, it's just too quick.
I guess because they're just not used to it they've been told for so long it cannot go any faster, and then suddenly it did. If enough,
well, $10 billion gets a lot of research. Basically,
is that really just it? So that if things were properly funded, we could have all sorts of things much more quickly. It's not the process.
Look, the funding is obviously important. The thing was, it was the prioritization. So all scientists were working on it. All ethics committees, all they wanted to do was work on COVID, not just vaccines but treatments as well. I mean, it was a pandemic. It's the first one in 100 years, so it was a valid response. So I don't think it's just money. I think if you had unlimited resources, you could probably fast track everything, but we don't live in that world.
Do you think there's any chance that the people who've managed to use some of the AI software to find new drug candidates, for example, much more quickly than they would have in the old-fashioned way, do you think that might apply further in medicine to things like these sorts
of... there's a concept of in silico research. So in silico as in a chip, and AI is obviously taking things to the next level. And so yeah, things are fast tracked. I mean, I guess it reduces the false negatives, I guess, the ones that don't really work. And so there's been conversations that will that affect the need to do say phase 1 first in human? Can the computer, the in silico, replace it? Oof. I personally don't think so. It would be premature at the moment. The human body's still quite difficult to predict, and I'm not sure I'll be trusting machine learning yet, but certainly in the future, this in silico research model certainly has a lot of potential, and a lot of the companies are using that to identify molecules more quickly to go into research, as opposed to doing away with research.
Oh, I think you can't do the real world is the real world. You have to
totally
research here, but maybe you can get more ideas about what is more likely to work and speed up which things you choose to test on the suggestion of some of these installations. Let me think. Do you have something further I haven't asked you, or would you like to make a...
No, I think so. So that's good, actually. I'm trying to get across the new study we're doing in the younger age group, because I think it's important to bring it down to the younger group. The disease awareness, as I mentioned before, the disease awareness in the younger group. So people in the older group are very aware, and I think that's because they now have friends who've had it. But people in the younger group, they're still, just common flu. And in most cases, that's probably the case, but there are certainly people who get really sick. I'm a vaccine. I like vaccines. I think philosophically they've done amazing things for humankind over the last several decades. Just amazing thing. I'm involved in the research, and I do look at the side effect profile and the negatives. So everything has a potential. There's always potential side effects, but certainly the work we've done and the vaccines we've worked on, so the COVID, RSV, some of the flu vaccines, just amazing results.
Well, I think it's a wonderful thing. And Dr. Munro Neville, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Study science, because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.